Cop assaults black woman, stunned to learn she's his superior. The shocking twist that shakes the entire police department. Smack. The sharp crack of the slap sliced through the still morning air. Naomi Carter reeled slightly, her breath unsteady, but her eyes never wavered. A fiery sting spread across her cheek, yet she refused to flinch, not in front of them. The crowd stood frozen, phones raised high, recording every second of the stunning scene. Officer Brian Reynolds stood rigid, his face red with fury, his hand still tingling from the blow. He'd lost his temper and he knew it, but rather than stopping, he grabbed her wrist roughly, yanking it toward him as he snapped a pair of handcuffs around her wrists in the middle of the street. "Who do you think you are, talking back to me?" he growled, shoving her toward the squad car. Naomi inhaled deeply, her eyes locked onto his without so much as a blink. As the crowd gasped and murmured in disbelief, a small, defiant smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "You just ended your entire career, Officer Reynolds." Brian paused briefly, scoffing. "Oh yeah? You think you can intimidate me? I'm just doing my job." But what he didn't realize was that his world was about to implode. Who was this woman, really? Why would one slap cause tremors through the entire police department? And what would unfold once Naomi Carter's true identity came to light? Don't look away. This story is about to twist in ways you won't expect. If stories like this grip you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. Inside the tight patrol car, Naomi's wrists ached from the biting cold of the cuffs. She leaned against the back seat, her gaze fixed on the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the glass. Her face revealed nothing. No panic, no fear, not even anger. She simply took a slow, measured breath, her eyes focused and calm, like someone who had faced far worse. Outside, the commotion grew louder. Voices of outrage filled the air from witnesses who had seen it all. "Let her go. We got it all on camera. This is police brutality. We're not letting this go." The distant wail of approaching sirens signaled backup. But Naomi knew they wouldn't be needed. The real storm was about to begin, only not for her, but for the men who had just arrested her. In the chaos, Naomi's mind began to drift, pulling her away from the present and back into the past. 20 years earlier, the sweltering summer wind swept across the cracked streets of Southbrook, the place Naomi once called home. The houses were aging, their paint chipped and fading. Streetlights blinked in and out of darkness. Children played on the sidewalks, tossing a basketball through a rusted hoop missing one rim. Naomi, just 10 years old at the time, was full of wonder, untouched by the harsh truths of the world. But that day would mark the beginning of everything changing. A loud disturbance erupted at the end of the block. Naomi and the other kids turned toward the noise. A cluster of officers stood outside a small house, their navy blue uniforms stiff, hands resting near their holstered weapons. They surrounded a man on his own front step, her father, Samuel Carter. "Put your hands where we can see them," one of the officers barked, his finger twitching near his sidearm. Samuel remained calm. "I haven't done anything. I was just checking on my neighbors," he said, hands raised, his voice even. There was no fear in his eyes, only steady defiance. Naomi didn't understand. She started toward her father, but her mother's hands clamped down on her shoulders, holding her back. "Mama, what's happening? Are they taking Daddy?" Naomi's voice cracked, her eyes pleading with her mother's tearful face. Her mother didn't respond. She only shook her head, her lips quivering. One of the officers stepped forward, seizing Samuel's arm and twisting it behind his back with force. He dropped to his knees as handcuffs locked tightly around his wrists. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." Obstruction? Justice? Naomi didn't understand the words. All she knew was her father was being humiliated, right in front of everyone. "No!" she screamed, breaking free from her mother's grip. Small but furious, she ran toward the officers, pounding her tiny fists against one of their legs. He barely glanced down before shoving her aside like she was nothing. She hit the pavement hard, the concrete tearing into her knees. Blood streaked her skin. But all she could see was her father, being dragged toward the waiting squad car. He turned, catching her gaze. His eyes filled with something unspoken, something she wouldn't fully understand until much later. That was the moment Naomi Carter began to change. She learned that justice wasn't automatic, that if she wanted change, she would have to be the change. The high-pitched scream of the patrol car's siren snapped Naomi back to the present. Her eyes hardened. That little girl lying on the sidewalk was long gone. Now she had power, and the officers who'd just thrown her into the back of a squad car were about to discover exactly who she was. Naomi Carter sat silently in the rear of the vehicle, her wrists still locked in steel. The car crept forward over worn asphalt, streetlights reflecting faintly off the windows. She stared out, calm, her expression unreadable. But inside, she was remembering the battles she'd fought, the trials that shaped her, the vow she'd made as a child on a broken street in Southbrook, the vow to never let injustice stand unanswered again. From a young age, Naomi understood that the world was anything but fair, that people like her, born in impoverished neighborhoods, were always judged differently. But she refused to accept that as her fate. The day her father was taken away, she made herself a promise. She would never allow another soul to endure the same injustice. She grew up driven by relentless determination, breaking through every barrier, challenging every limitation. Instead of letting anger devour her, she transformed it into her strength. While others her age chose simpler routes, Naomi buried herself in law books, dissecting the legal system piece by piece, exposing every loophole used by those in power to twist the rules to their benefit. She purposefully took the most difficult road, becoming an anti-corruption investigator. In her early days on the job, no one believed that a young black woman could make a real impact. The patronizing looks, the hushed whispers about her not belonging in the system, none of it fazed her. She wasn't there for approval. All she needed was one chance. And when that opportunity came, she made sure they would never question her abilities again. Naomi immersed herself in high-stakes investigations, unearthing the rot hidden beneath the polished surfaces of the nation's most influential figures. She faced threats, surveillance, and isolation at the hands of the very system she vowed to uphold. But she never flinched. She tore apart corruption networks embedded in the government, dragging senior officials into the spotlight and forcing accountability. The name Naomi Carter became synonymous with fear for those who abused their power, an unrelenting force of justice. From a girl raised in a struggling neighborhood, she had ascended to the peak of law enforcement, becoming the chief inspector of the Bureau of Government Ethics, one of the most influential positions in the justice system. Naomi wasn't just an investigator. She had become a symbol of reform, a tempest that swept away those who misused authority, a figure the establishment had no choice but to respect. The patrol car continued down the road at a steady pace, the low hum of the engine slicing through the silence. The officer in the front seat glanced at the rearview mirror, briefly observing Naomi's composed expression. To him, she was just another black woman in custody, nothing special. He had no idea that, in mere moments, he would discover the terrifying truth. The woman he had handcuffed was not some random civilian, not a powerless bystander. She was the one person who could ruin his entire career with a single phone call. And she had no plans to let this go unnoticed. Brian Reynolds gripped the steering wheel tighter, his eyes fixed ahead. Yet his thoughts circled in a rigid loop, replaying old mantras from his past like a broken record. As a longtime patrol officer in Silver's Grove, Brian saw himself as the keeper of order. To him, everything needed to be tidy, quiet, and under control. No surprises, no disruptions. A black woman jogging alone in this neighborhood? That was disruption. That was out of place. He'd been raised in a conservative, tightly disciplined home. His father, a hardened military veteran, had hammered one message into him over and over. A cop's duty was to enforce complete order. At dinner, his father's gravelly voice would thunder through the room, fists slamming on the table for emphasis. This world only works because of laws, and laws mean nothing if there aren't men to uphold them. Cop never backs down. When you wear that badge, you are the law. That mindset followed Brian from those rigid childhood dinners to the moment he joined the force. In his eyes, police officers were infallible. If someone was detained, questioned, or subdued, it was because they deserved it. The system worked because men like him kept it in motion. But deep inside, Brian understood that his father's teachings weren't solely about justice. There was another belief hidden beneath the surface, the idea that order could only survive if those who didn't fit in were kept at arm's length. "You ever notice, Brian?" his father once said. "It's always them stirring up trouble. Always them." The word "them" was never spelled out. But Brian knew exactly who his father meant. The ones who didn't look like him. The poor. People of color. Those who didn't belong in Silverest Grove. Decades of that conditioning had molded Brian into who he was. He didn't require complaints from locals or formal reports. He didn't even need a legitimate reason. His instincts, honed since childhood, told him who was suspicious, and those instincts were screaming now. From a distance, he spotted Naomi Carter jogging briskly down the spotless stone-paved sidewalk. A black woman in athletic wear, alone in the early morning. He'd never seen her around here before. Leaning slightly against the car door, he squinted, scanning her appearance. The residents of this upscale neighborhood, the ones he knew, didn't look like her. Who is she? What is she doing here? He eyed the street sign. This was a part of town where, in his mind, someone like her didn't belong. The thoughts came naturally. A stranger in a wealthy area. Potential threat. He didn't wait for a call or a report. His gut was all the justification he needed. Lowering the window slightly, he reached for his radio but paused. No need to report it just yet. He'd handle it himself. The patrol car's emergency lights flashed, casting a red-blue glow across the pavement. With a deliberate move, he guided the vehicle onto the jogging path, blocking Naomi Carter's route. A slight smirk pulled at his lips. "Let's see what this is all about." The lights flickered against the pavement, casting jagged reflections beneath the dim glow of the street lamps. Naomi came to a halt, not out of fear, but because she already knew exactly what was about to happen. Removing one earbud, she turned her head slightly, her gaze steady as she watched the officer exit the vehicle. Brian Reynolds slammed the door behind him, adjusting his holster with the unconscious arrogance of someone who had grown used to unquestioned authority. His posture was rigid, his expression a blend of caution and the smug self-assurance that comes with years of unchecked power. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative, as if addressing a suspect caught in the middle of a crime. Naomi didn't react immediately. She merely studied him like a seasoned strategist evaluating an opponent, planning her move before making it. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, composed, and unhurried. "Can I help you, officer?" Brian didn't appreciate that response. He didn't like how she stood so still, unaffected, refusing to shrink under his gaze. People like her typically responded with fear, anger, or rushed justifications. But she wasn't like the others. Too calm, too self-assured, too at ease. "What are you doing here?" he asked, arms crossing, his stance subtly widening. A quiet display of dominance. Naomi glanced at the patrol car that had intentionally cut her off, then looked back at him. A flicker of amusement sparked in her eyes. "I'm jogging. You don't see that." Brian's jaw tightened. He felt it. A shift in control he wasn't used to. No, this didn't feel right. A black woman jogging through this neighborhood? That couldn't be all. "We got reports of suspicious activity," he said, injecting as much forced authority into his voice as he could muster. "You fit the description." Naomi let out a quiet, knowing laugh. "Oh yeah? And what exactly does that description look like?" He didn't have a real answer. They both knew it. "Where do you live?" he asked, changing his approach, searching her eyes for even the slightest hesitation. Naomi folded her arms, already tired of the predictable routine. "Right here. In this neighborhood." Brian's expression barely concealed his doubt. He didn't believe her. "You got ID on you?" She shook her head. "Didn't think I needed ID just to go for a run." Brian released a dry, humorless laugh. No ID, no proof. That's suspicious. By now, the street had begun to change. Passers-by slowed, some stopping altogether. A few began recording with their phones. Whispers started spreading. She's just jogging. What's the problem? Looks like another case of cops hassling black folks for nothing. Brian heard them and he despised it. He hated the eyes on him, hated the subtle doubt creeping into their expressions, hated that for once, his authority was being questioned. Frustration ignited inside him. She was making him look weak. He stepped forward, lowering his voice, as if that might somehow restore control. How about you tell me the real reason you're here? Naomi took a steady breath, her tone sharp yet unwavering. Are you stopping me just because I'm jogging through this neighborhood? Brian's teeth clenched. He hated that question. Hated how she was turning the tables, making him explain himself. But he had no response. And he knew it. The phones were up. The crowd was watching. He had to act. Had to reclaim control. So he made a decision, the wrong one. Naomi Carter stood tall, her posture unshaken, eyes locked on the officer before her. The red and blue lights of the patrol car pulsed steadily, reflecting off the clean pavement. The murmurs continued. Phones stayed raised. But Naomi didn't flinch. Brian Reynolds stood rigid, fists balled, his breathing heavier now. He despised the way she stared at him. Calm, confident, completely unafraid. Are you questioning me just because I'm jogging in this neighborhood? Naomi repeated, her voice measured, slow, yet infused with unmistakable defiance. Brian's jaw twitched. He felt boxed in. The onlookers were waiting, cameras recording, judgment hanging thick in the air. And instead of restraining him, the pressure only intensified his fury. Naomi didn't avert her gaze, didn't stammer an excuse, didn't rush to explain. She just stood there, steady and still, as if he wasn't a threat at all. Something twisted inside Brian. In all his years as a cop, he'd grown used to being feared, to bowed heads, rushed apologies, instant submission. People obeyed him, without question. But Naomi was different. He stepped in closer, his tone growing harsher. I'm following protocol. If you don't want trouble, you should cooperate. Naomi didn't move. Can you point to exactly what law I've broken? Brian blinked. He had no response. Rage smothered his reason. Don't you dare get smart with me. And then his hand moved. The slap landed with a sharp, brutal crack, slicing through the tense air like a whip. Naomi didn't fall. She barely even staggered. Her head tilted slightly from the impact, her cheek stinging. But when she straightened, her eyes hadn't lost their calm. Slowly, deliberately, she turned to face him again. The crowd fell silent. Someone whispered, "Did he just?" Another voice, hushed and horrified, "Oh my God, he hit her." A third, more urgent, "I got it all on video. This is going to blow up." Brian's breath caught in his throat, stunned, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just done. But in that brief instant, he realized he had just made the gravest mistake of his life. Every phone had captured it. Everyone had seen it. He had gone too far. And Naomi, still standing, still composed, looked at him with something far more unsettling than anger. The calm, unshakable certainty that he was going to pay for this. Brian Reynolds pushed through the doors of the precinct, his grip firm around Naomi Carter's arm, a clear assertion of dominance. His heart pounded, not from exertion, but from the smoldering fury still churning inside him. He didn't like how things had unfolded. He didn't like the way she looked at him, composed, assured, completely unaffected by what had just occurred. But he still convinced himself he had control. As he escorted Naomi inside, other officers turned to look. The shift in the room's atmosphere was subtle, but undeniable. A hushed tension, brief glances exchanged. Brian ignored them. He'd dealt with situations like this before. A black woman with too much pride, someone who thought they could challenge law enforcement. It wouldn't take long for her to understand exactly where she stood. Just as he was about to push her into the holding cell, his radio crackled sharply with a commanding voice. "Stop right there." The entire precinct fell silent. A few officers exchanged glances. Rarely did an order come through with such urgency. "Do not place her in holding. Repeat, take her to a private room. No one touches her." The authority in the voice was absolute. Brian's hand tensed slightly. A cold weight settled deep in his gut. He scanned the room expecting an explanation, but none came. Every eye had already turned to the far end of the space, where an office door had just swung open. Captain Vanessa Dawson stood there, his superior the highest-ranking officer in the building. The person with the power to end his career in a single breath. Her expression was unreadable, but the true threat wasn't in her face. It was in what she was holding. A tablet, and on its screen a video played. The moment he'd slapped Naomi Carter. The crowd, the raised phones, the unmistakable voices. "Oh my God! He hit her! I got the whole thing on video! The whole world is going to see this!" The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Every gaze landed on him. Some officers shook their heads. Others looked away. Not a word was spoken. Naomi, still beside him, finally spoke. She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm and unwavering. "Looks like you didn't check social media before dragging me in, Brian." He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. Vanessa never broke eye contact. Her voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Officer Reynolds." And in that instant, he knew this wasn't just a problem. This was the end. Brian Reynolds stood motionless, sweat beading at his temple. He clenched his fists, desperately holding on to what little control he had left. The room remained still, unnaturally so. Every officer was watching, their gazes shifting between him and the woman by his side. Vanessa Dawson stepped forward, her stare icy and unrelenting. She raised the tablet higher, letting the entire room witness the footage in real time. The slap, the handcuffs. Naomi Carter, sitting motionless in the patrol car, her face unreadable, but emanating something undeniably dangerous. Brian felt the pressure of every eye in the room. What had begun as silent curiosity had transformed into something far heavier: horror, disappointment, and sheer revulsion. Vanessa's voice rang out again. "Do you even know who you just arrested, Officer Reynolds?" His throat constricted, but he forced himself to respond, trying to keep his tone steady. "A troublemaker. Someone resisting lawful authority." A ripple spread through the room. Sharp inhales, hushed murmurs. One young officer widened his eyes in disbelief. Naomi let out a low chuckle. Not from amusement, but from something closer to understanding, as if she had seen this coming. She lifted her hands slightly, her voice calm but commanding. "Take off the cuffs." No one moved. She repeated it, slower this time, each syllable laced with quiet dominance. "Take them off." A rookie officer, pale and visibly shaken, stepped forward hesitantly. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the key. A sharp click echoed through the stillness as the handcuffs unlocked and fell to the floor. Naomi gently rubbed her wrists. The angry red marks stood out starkly against her skin, a silent testimony to everything that had happened. She looked up, her eyes razor-sharp, dissecting him without saying a word. Vanessa didn't blink. Her voice remained level but unshakable. "You just handcuffed and assaulted one of the most powerful officials in the judicial system." Brian's stomach sank. His pulse thundered in his ears. "This is the Chief Inspector of the National Ethics Bureau. My superior and yours." The air in the room thickened. A few officers let out audible breaths. Others turned their faces away, as if unable to witness the unraveling that was taking place before them. One young officer took a step back instinctively, his expression bordering on fear, like he had just witnessed something irreversible. Brian felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Naomi stepped forward, now standing mere inches away. The space between them grew heavy, her presence overwhelming. "I told you," she said softly. You just destroyed yourself. His throat tightened, his fists curled. But deep down, he already knew. He had lost. And this nightmare was only just beginning. Brian Reynolds stood frozen, sweat gathering on his temple. His breath shallow as the weight of the room pressed in around him. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence wasn't just heavy. It was suffocating. Every eye was fixed on him, each one filled with judgment, disbelief, and something far worse, certainty. Certainty that this was the end. Vanessa Dawson stepped forward, her expression as unreadable as ever, but there was no hesitation in her voice. I won't waste anyone's time. Brian Reynolds, you are officially suspended from duty, effective immediately. The words hit him like a blow to the chest. His lungs tightened, his vision tilted for a second. His mind searched desperately for something. An excuse, a defense, any words to push back against the nightmare unfolding in front of him. What? His own voice sounded distant, hoarse, and unsteady. Vanessa didn't repeat herself. She didn't have to. Instead, she lifted the tablet in her hand and turned the screen toward the room. Headlines flooded the display. His name, his face, his actions, replayed in an endless loop across every major news outlet. Silverest officer caught on camera. Police brutality against black woman exposed. Officer Brian Reynolds under fire for abuse of power. Public demands consequences. Political figures speak out against police violence. Shocking video spreading rapidly. The walls seemed to close in. His breathing turned shallow, but no amount of air could steady the freefall. Naomi Carter stood nearby, arms folded, unmoving, unshaken. She had seen this coming. She had anticipated this moment. Vanessa turned to the two closest officers. Strip him of his weapon, badge, and credentials. Now. A murmur rippled through the room, but no one spoke in his defense. The officers who had once stood beside him, who had laughed and shared drinks, now refused to meet his eyes. The disgrace wasn't his alone anymore. It had spread, casting a shadow over the entire precinct. One officer carefully removed his firearm, handling it with the care of someone collecting evidence. Another reached for his badge, slipping it off with practiced hands before tucking it away. The weight of that empty space on his chest was crushing. He tried to speak, to claw his way out of this unraveling disaster, but Naomi took a step forward, just one, close enough for him to feel her presence like gravity itself. She tilted her head slightly, her voice low but resolute. Do you still think you have power, Officer Reynolds? No one laughed. No one moved. Only the crushing reality remained, that his world had been torn apart, and there was no way to undo it. Brian Reynolds stood motionless in the center of the room, the floor beneath him metaphorically collapsing. He looked around, searching desperately for a familiar face, for someone, anyone, to stand beside him, to speak up for him. But everyone turned away. The officers who once greeted him each morning, who had joked with him over stale coffee, now avoided his gaze like he was a stranger. He wasn't a cop anymore. Vanessa Dawson remained still, unyielding, like a stone monument. Her decision was final. His weapon, his badge gone. And with them, his identity. Still, he clung to denial. I didn't do anything wrong, he stammered, desperation cracking his voice. I was just doing my job. I had the right to be suspicious. I had the right to ask questions. She resisted. She provoked me first. No one answered. No one cared. His excuses fell flat. Naomi Carter stepped closer, her movements slow and intentional, each step purposeful, like she was claiming every inch of ground he had once controlled. She stopped just a breath away, her eyes cutting through him like sharpened steel. The silence stretched until it suffocated him. Brian swallowed hard, a chill creeping down his spine. Naomi tilted her head again, her voice soft yet weighted, like a final judgment. Did you really think that badge made you powerful? He hesitated, his breath caught. You never had power, Officer Reynolds. She let the words linger, let the truth pierce through him, each syllable like a dagger. And just like that, it's gone. Because you abused it. No one objected. No one argued. Because they all knew she was right. The realization hit like a death blow, stripping away whatever pride or defense he had left. He wasn't just suspended. He was dismantled.
No vai.
No gun. No respect. Brian Reynolds had been erased, and there was nothing he could do to bring himself back. The glass doors of the precinct swung open, and Naomi Carter stepped outside. The bright flashes of cameras met her with blinding force, the roar of voices crashing over her like waves. Reporters surged forward, microphones extended, their questions tumbling over one another in a frantic attempt to be heard. What did she think about the arrest? Was she filing a lawsuit? Would she press charges against Brian Reynolds? She didn't rush to respond. She moved with poise and certainty, stepping down the marble steps with measured grace. Her face, once unreadable inside the precinct, now radiated something deeper, an unshakable command of the moment. She wasn't here to explain. She wasn't here to defend. She was here to decide. The reporters' voices grew louder, more urgent, the crowd pressing closer in anticipation. But Naomi didn't flinch. She knew what this moment meant. She knew its weight extended beyond a viral video. This wasn't just about her. This was about everyone who had ever faced injustice and been silenced. It was about the system that let it happen over and over again. Naomi met the cameras head-on. Her voice was calm, steady, and final. This wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who had ever experienced injustice. The reporters paused, a fleeting moment of stillness, before the chaos resumed. Pens scribbling, cameras recording, fully aware that this single statement would define the headlines. But Naomi didn't linger to explain. She didn't have to. The message was delivered, and the world had no choice but to listen. Within mere hours of Naomi Carter's exit from the police station, the video went viral across social media. What began as a few brief clips shared on platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram rapidly escalated into a storm of outrage. Millions watched, commented, and reposted, stoking the flames. Hashtags like #JusticeForNaomi, #EndPoliceBrutality, and #accountability now shot to the top of global trends. Evening news outlets quickly picked up the story, making it their leading segment, not only criticizing Brian Reynolds' actions but also casting a critical eye on the law enforcement system as a whole. The coverage probed deeply into institutional abuse of authority and racial discrimination within policing, amplifying the public discourse. Yet the movement didn't remain confined to the digital realm. Demonstrations erupted in cities nationwide. Outside the Silverest Grove Police Department, hundreds gathered, their voices unified in a powerful demand for justice. Signs soared above the crowd: "Justice for all, no immunity for police. We will not be silenced." People from diverse backgrounds, students, educators, attorneys, entrepreneurs, poured into the streets, protesting not merely against one officer, but against the entire structure that had allowed such conduct to endure unchecked. Even retired law enforcement officials began to speak out, revealing incidents of misconduct they had observed and the cover-ups they had once helped conceal. They confessed how honorable officers were silenced whenever they attempted to challenge the prevailing system. Politicians, too, found themselves unable to ignore the growing outcry. Press conferences echoed with calls for reform. Emergency hearings were scheduled, and legislators began feeling the heat. Naomi Carter had done more than expose a single officer. She had ignited a movement too potent to dismiss. And this time, the resistance wouldn't be silenced. Brian Reynolds sat alone in a rundown, nearly empty apartment, the only place he could afford with the little money he had left. Scattered across the table were newspapers and magazines, all blaring headlines about the disgraced former cop of Silverest Grove. Bold titles leapt out at him with every glance: "Officer slaps black woman in public, suspended," "The fall of a corrupt cop," Brian Reynolds, from badge to disgrace. Each day brought more scathing media coverage. His name and photo were everywhere. When he opened his laptop, it was inundated with hateful emails and threats. Strangers branded him a racist thug, a power abuser. Mocking memes and altered photos flooded his feed. A viral video parodying his slap, set to comedic music, had surpassed 1 million views on YouTube. He had become a national punchline. Friends and former colleagues who once shared long night shifts with him had gone silent. A few sent brief messages, carefully neutral, signaling they didn't want to be involved. Most said nothing at all. His phone remained eerily quiet, not because people had forgotten him, but because they no longer wanted anything to do with someone marked as a disgrace. To his former teammates, Brian was now a liability, an embarrassment they preferred to avoid. His family didn't offer much comfort either. His father, a proud veteran who once bragged about his son's badge, now refused to answer the door. Brian could picture him sitting silently in his old chair, reading news stories packed with insults about his son. His mother had stopped answering the phone. Every call went straight to a cold, automated response. The person you are trying to reach is unavailable. Please leave a message. He no longer dared to go outside. He could feel the burning stares of neighbors, people he had once protected, people who used to call on him for help, now turning their backs on him. Where once he had worn a uniform with pride, now he bore the weight of shame and isolation. Sleepless nights dragged on. He slouched in a broken armchair, an empty liquor bottle tipped over on the floor. The flickering light from a small TV played the same news loop he now knew by heart. Footage of the slap, Naomi's calm defiance, her unshaken composure in the face of his aggression. It haunted him, playing over and over in his mind like a nightmare that wouldn't end. At first, he blamed everyone else. The media, the bystanders who recorded the incident, even the fellow officers who hadn't stood up for him. But slowly, his fixation narrowed onto one target, Naomi Carter. She started it, he muttered under his breath, his speech slurred with alcohol. She ruined me. She took it all. The words replayed in his mind like a bitter mantra. From the ashes of his humiliation, a dangerous idea began to form. If she destroyed me, I'll destroy her. He reached for his old laptop for the first time in weeks. His hands trembled slightly as he typed Naomi Carter into the search bar. He began following her every move, reading every article, watching every speech, saving every image he could find. With each line, each smiling photo of her in front of crowds, his bitterness deepened. He understood he could never recover his career, never reclaim his reputation. But one thing became clear: he couldn't let her walk away unpunished. And so, in the dim, silent apartment, his worn face reflecting in the laptop screen, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights and fury, Brian Reynolds began crafting his plan for revenge. He sat motionless in the cramped room, surrounded by the clutter of ridicule, the clippings, the memes, the cruel headlines. Every long night passed with him sinking further into bitterness, hatred festering like a wound. He had lost everything: his job, his family, his name. And as the despair thickened, the thought of vengeance took root and grew. Yet he had no plan, no money, no one to turn to. All he possessed was his anger. One night, as usual, he wandered into a dimly lit bar nestled in a forgotten alleyway. He had visited this place many times before, drowning his sorrows in the darkness of the back booth. But tonight felt different. A stranger took the seat beside him, his expression unreadable, his presence deliberate. "I know you, Brian Reynolds," the man said as he sat down, his tone calm but sharp enough to grab Brian's attention. "You used to be a cop. Now you've got nothing." Brian narrowed his eyes, unsure of the stranger's intent. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cold, tinged with suspicion. The man, introducing himself as Miller, got straight to the point. "I've got a proposal. I know you want Naomi Carter to suffer. I have a way to make that happen." Brian felt a mixture of curiosity and wariness. This man wasn't some random barfly. He had purpose. He had knowledge. "How do you know about me? What kind of game is this?" Brian asked, his tone low and guarded, eyes narrowing further. Miller simply smirked. "I know plenty. I know the media's been tearing you apart. Your family's shut you out. Your colleagues, they've vanished. And I know what's eating you alive. You want revenge. But you don't know how to get it. He leaned in closer, voice lowered but clear. I have connections. People in high places who hate Naomi Carter just as much as you do. Brian's anger surged. He had lost everything that mattered. Now this stranger was handing him a chance to strike back. But he wasn't naive. Why help me? What do you get out of this? He asked sharply. Miller looked him dead in the eye, his expression razor sharp. I don't do favors without getting something in return. But that's not important right now. What matters is making Naomi Carter lose it all. Just like you did. If you cooperate, I'll show you how. Brian sat silently, processing the offer. The rage within him had never cooled. Could this be the opportunity to flip the script? He didn't trust Miller. But he trusted his own hatred. That was enough. All right, Brian said, his voice low, laced with determination. Tell me the plan. Miller smirked, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Good. We start immediately. And when it's done, she won't have anything left. The words echoed in Brian's mind as he grabbed another drink and downed it in a single gulp. The plan for revenge had begun. From then on, Brian Reynolds followed a new routine each day. He parked his aging car a few blocks from Naomi Carter's office, his eyes locked on the building's entrance. He had studied her routine over the past week. He knew when she arrived, where she ate lunch, even how she walked home. Naomi varied her routes, but Brian was patient, learning her patterns one by one. Who did she talk to? Who did she trust? What secrets was she keeping? These questions filled his mind constantly. But Brian needed more than just surveillance. One night, he visited a private investigator's office on the edge of town. The kind that took shady cases no one else wanted. The air was thick with smoke. The detective, an overweight man in a wrinkled shirt, barely looked up. I need intel on Naomi Carter, Brian said, his voice even as he sat across from the desk. Her past, her contacts, cases she's worked on. If she's made even one mistake, I want to know. The investigator leaned back, lighting a cigarette. Don't care why you want it. Just pay me. Half now, the rest when I get results. Brian nodded, sliding over a thick envelope. I want it all. Leave nothing out. A few days later, Brian received a thick file details of Naomi's history, her past relationships, stalled investigations. On the surface, nothing damaging. But to Brian, each detail was a possible crack in her armor. He found names of people who had once worked with Naomi but had since vanished from the scene. He uncovered a past investigation Naomi had led that had fizzled due to lack of evidence. He didn't need proof of wrongdoing. He just needed something to create doubt. Brian pinned documents across his apartment's bulletin board, stringing together the information like pieces of a puzzle. He was hunting for a weakness, a gap in her narrative, anything to smear her image. Slowly, a strategy took shape. He knew he couldn't launch a direct assault on her reputation. But if he was subtle, smart, and relentless, he could force Naomi to defend herself, make her lose confidence. And when she started slipping, he'd strike. All he needed was the right crack to show. Soon, Naomi Carter's name began to appear on anonymous blogs. A post accused her of manipulating power during old investigations. It claimed, without evidence, that Naomi had withheld information to protect corrupt colleagues. The vagueness made it even more believable. The post went viral within hours. Then came another blow. An article on a questionable news site alleged that Naomi was involved in financial misconduct during her time as an investigator. It cited anonymous insiders who claimed she had accepted a bribe from a powerful official in exchange for turning a blind eye to key evidence. Naomi found herself at the center of a digital storm. She had never taken a bribe, never hidden the truth. But none of that mattered. The seeds of doubt had already been planted. Low-tier media sites, often backed by unknown players, began to amplify the story. They added vague, expert opinions and exaggerated details, giving the narrative the illusion of legitimacy. Naomi was under attack. And the worst part? The public was listening. These fabrications didn't just stay in the darker corners of the internet. They gradually spread to mainstream social media platforms, quickly gaining thousands of views and reactions. The average reader, unaware of the actual truth, found it hard to tell what was genuine and what was false. Some posts even featured old images of Naomi from official events, repurposed to lend credibility to the misleading narratives. Every image, every quote was distorted and placed out of context, transforming her from a justice seeker into a suspicious figure in the eyes of the public. Slowly, the tone of online comments began to shift. What was once support turned into skepticism. If she's really innocent, then why are there so many reports like this? One user asked. I don't know anymore. But where there's smoke, there's fire, another responded. Doubt began to cling to Naomi's name. Though she remained the chief inspector at the Bureau of Government Ethics, she now faced increasingly uncomfortable questions from journalists. Are you truly innocent? Can you respond to the recent allegations? Naomi had to fight harder than ever to defend her name, all while enduring mounting psychological strain. The false reports continued to spread. New posts exaggerated the accusations further, and the public began to ask, what is she hiding? The blow to Naomi's reputation had landed. Now she had to find a way to withstand the growing wave of public judgment. One early morning, as Naomi stepped outside her home, she spotted a white envelope without any postage mark lying on her doorstep. At first, she assumed it was a note from a neighbor or a work-related message. But when she opened it, her eyes froze on the images inside. Printed on thin, slightly faded paper, yet clear enough to make her heart sink. The photographs were of her. One showed her leaving her office. Another captured her speaking with a colleague at a familiar cafe. The third was of her family at a picnic. Her son's face visible, his innocent smile a haunting contrast to the words scrawled beneath each picture. Each photo had a single line of typed text. Be careful. We are watching. Naomi clutched the envelope tightly, her palms clammy with cold sweat. She took a slow breath, trying to stay composed. But the unease crept through her. This wasn't the first anonymous message she had received, but the earlier ones had only contained vague insults. This time, the senders clearly knew her. They knew her routine. They knew her family. In the following days, more letters arrived, some in her office mailbox, others sent directly to her home. The photos became more invasive, taken from angles she never noticed, showing moments she thought were private. One letter even included a picture of her at her son's school, a clear warning that they could get close to anyone she cared about. Naomi didn't panic, but anxiety gnawed at her constantly. She began double-checking every window, making sure the doors were locked at night. She called her son's school and asked for heightened security. Any unfamiliar vehicle parked near her home put her on edge. Still, she maintained a calm exterior. She knew the goal was to frighten her, to make her crumble in public. But Naomi also had a strong suspicion about who was behind it all. She had no solid proof yet, but she hadn't forgotten the look in Brian Reynolds' eyes, nor the hatred in his voice. Naomi began keeping meticulous records of each letter, each photograph. She saved them as evidence, but didn't release them publicly. She knew this wasn't just intimidation. This was a calculated effort to break her spirit. But instead of giving in to fear, she quietly prepared herself. This wasn't over, and she refused to play the victim. Naomi Carter stepped up to the podium in a crowded press room, the lights of the cameras illuminating her face. But there was no fear in her eyes. She understood this moment wasn't just another media briefing. It was a turning point. Lately, she began, her voice steady and precise. My family and I have endured a series of baseless attacks and false claims designed to destroy my reputation. But I want to make one thing clear. I will not stay silent. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. These lies are not just personal attacks. They are part of a larger effort to uphold illegitimate power by discrediting those who challenge it. I am committed to uncovering the individuals behind these smears. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing nonstop. Her words weren't just a defense, they were a declaration of intent. She wasn't just going to clear her name. She was going to expose the people hiding in the shadows. Naomi didn't stop at words. Immediately after the press conference, she initiated a private investigation, assembling a team of trusted financial experts and legal professionals. She wanted to follow the money, trace the source, and identify who was funding the campaign against her. It wasn't easy. The individuals behind the smear campaign knew how to cover their tracks. The funds were laundered through shell accounts, funneled via fake charities, and bounced between front companies. But Naomi had years of experience dismantling such operations. Layer by layer, the web of lies began to unravel. Eventually, her team uncovered a crucial connection: a significant transfer of funds from an account linked to an underground network. This group was believed to be closely tied to certain members of the police force, people who had protected corrupt officers and gone after those who stood in their way. Naomi wasn't shocked when the names behind the network came to light. They were former colleagues of Brian Reynolds, individuals who had once turned a blind eye to his misconduct. Now that Brian had fallen from grace, they were determined to exact revenge. They didn't just want to preserve their system, they wanted to make Naomi an example, a warning to anyone bold enough to oppose them. But Naomi remained unshaken. The evidence was mounting, and she knew the moment for a counterstrike had come. Naomi stood confidently at the podium in the spacious press room, the bright lights from dozens of reporters' cameras glaring directly onto her composed, resolute face. She had meticulously prepared for this moment. Today wasn't merely a statement to the public. It marked the start of a full-scale retaliation. She began speaking with a steady, clear tone, each word cutting like a blade. In recent weeks, I've been targeted by a wave of disinformation, baseless accusations, and threats aimed at tarnishing not only my reputation but that of my family. Today, I state clearly, I will not stand for this. The reporters were silent, hanging on her every word, the tension in the air thick. Naomi looked directly into the cameras, her message unmistakable. I will identify those responsible for these attacks. I will bring them into the spotlight, and I will defend my integrity, as well as the dignity of all those who have suffered injustice. The room erupted with questions, the sound of camera shutters filling the space. But Naomi wasn't done. She acted immediately after the press conference. Naomi launched a private investigation, not through official channels, but via her personal network of individuals she trusted completely. Her first target, the money trail. She understood these fabricated stories didn't emerge from nowhere. They required financing, coordination, and backing from a more powerful source. She hired a team of forensic accountants and seasoned investigators to trace the financial web. They sifted through bank statements, unusual transfers, and suspicious contracts. Naomi oversaw every phase, urging the team to push further, dig deeper. Soon, the first signs emerged. A string of irregular transactions and vague financial dealings funneled through several middlemen. From fake companies to hastily registered nonprofits, each layer of deception began to unravel. And behind those layers were familiar names, names from inside the police force. The initial findings confirmed Naomi's suspicions. This was no mere defamation campaign. It was part of a secret network where certain officers protected each other while retaliating against anyone who dared speak out. These were the same figures Naomi had investigated in the past. They didn't just want her silenced, they wanted to send a message. Challenge the system and you'll suffer. Still, Naomi stood firm. The documents and data she compiled were becoming clearer with every passing day. Each transfer, each alias, each shell company, every thread led to the heart of a hidden organization. She had no intention of keeping it to herself. Naomi wasn't just protecting her name. She was going to expose the entire corrupt system. Her counterattack had begun. And this time, she wasn't just reclaiming her honor. She was rewriting the rules. Rain poured relentlessly, hammering the windshield and leaving long streaks down the glass. In the dark, Brian Reynolds' car sat parked just a few hundred meters from Naomi Carter's home. He was behind the wheel, hands clenched tightly, eyes locked on the dim light spilling from a ground floor window. He had been observing her for weeks, knew her routines when she returned home, when the lights went off, when the house went quiet. But tonight, something had changed. He didn't want to just watch anymore. Brian had lost control long ago. He had orchestrated a flood of false articles, planted fabricated accusations meant to destroy her reputation. But instead of crumbling, Naomi had stood tall, holding press conferences, vowing publicly to unmask her attackers. "She's mocking me," he muttered, rage simmering in his voice. "She thinks she's untouchable." He grabbed a bottle of liquor beside him and took a long, burning gulp. He no longer cared about getting caught, about what might happen next. His thoughts revolved only around Naomi Carter and the consuming hatred boiling inside him. "If she wants a fight," he said through clenched teeth, "I'll show her what real pain feels like." Opening the trunk, he rummaged through its contents. In the dark, he retrieved an old baseball bat, once used for practice, now gripped like a weapon. He tightened his hold, feeling the familiar weight in his hand as if reclaiming control. Outside, the rain showed no signs of letting up. Water soaked his hair, drenched his clothes. But he paid no mind. He fixed his stare on the house, lights still on, and inhaled slowly, deeply. His thoughts turned violent. He didn't just want to shame Naomi anymore. He wanted something crueler, something final. He stepped closer, the bat clutched tightly. In the dim glow of the streetlight, his shadow stretched across the pavement, like a predator preparing to strike. Brian Reynolds had nothing left to lose, and that made him more dangerous than ever. He stood hidden in the shadows, the pale blue light of the laptop screen casting a faint glow over his face. On the screen, the control panel for Naomi's home security system. He had spent weeks learning how to breach it, decoding passwords, bypassing firewalls, disabling cameras. Beside him, 3 masked men stood silently. Hired through an old connection, they barely knew one another, but they had something in common. None of them feared violence. "We only have to do this once," Brian said quietly, his tone sharp with tension. "No noise, no mistakes. Tonight, Naomi Carter pays." They approached the house silently, their figures hidden by the rustling trees in the wind. Brian took the lead, his hand trembling slightly as he inserted the key into the back door. A soft click echoed as the door opened, and they slipped inside. The living room lights were already off, and the house was plunged into darkness. When Naomi returned home after a long day, she immediately sensed something was amiss. The hallway light flickered on as she entered, but the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. She paused at the living room door, her heart racing. The silence that surrounded her home was unnerving, like an ominous warning. She set her bag down and quickly scanned the room. The stillness made every step she took on the wooden floor seem amplified. Naomi took a step back, her mind racing to recall any safety measures she had put in place. Something was wrong. Just as she turned to grab her phone to call for help, a shadow lunged from the darkness. She spun around just in time to avoid the attack, but Brian appeared, a gun trembling in his hand. He was only a few meters away, his bloodshot eyes full of fury. "You ruined my life," he screamed, his voice breaking like a storm that had been gathering for too long. "Now it's your turn to pay." Naomi stayed composed, but she knew she was in grave danger. She kept her calm, her eyes scanning the room. He wasn't alone. She could hear footsteps behind her, and she knew the others were closing in. "Brian, calm down," she said, her voice firm but not loud, hoping to keep him talking as long as possible. "You don't want to do this. You don't want to destroy your life even more." Brian scoffed, his voice tight with tension. "I have nothing left to lose, and you're not worth keeping what you have." He raised the gun, but his hand shook. Naomi knew that if she had any chance to turn this around, it had to be now. She had to think quickly and find a way out before it was too late. Naomi stood tall, showing no fear, even as the gun was pointed directly at her. Her gaze remained calm, as though she were calculating her next move. Brian Reynolds was trembling. His hand, his eyes, his voice, and his posture all betrayed his instability. Naomi, on the other hand, was unshaken. "You think this gun is going to scare me?" she spoke, her voice quiet but clear, each word striking at his shattered pride. "I've faced men like you my whole life, and I know one thing: You're not as strong as you think you are. Brian furrowed his brow and took a step back but kept the gun aimed at her. Shut up, he yelled, his voice strained with tension. But Naomi didn't stop. She knew he was losing control, and she also knew that if he fired, it would all be over. She just needed to buy time. You had your chance, Brian, she continued, her tone more measured than ever. A chance to make things right. A chance to live a life where no one would be ashamed of you. But you chose this path. You're destroying yourself. And now you want me to take the blame for you. Naomi's words left Brian stunned. He exhaled sharply, his hands shaking even more. She didn't know how many were outside, but she trusted that her team of undercover investigators had caught the anomaly. She knew they were looking for the signal from the phone she had intentionally left exposed earlier, just before everything began. Just as Brian prepared to pull the trigger, a sudden sound rang out, the shattering of glass. The window exploded into shards as a SWAT team burst through, storming in. In an instant, Brian was thrown to the floor, the gun slipping from his hand. His furious screams were quickly silenced as the handcuffs tightened around his wrists. He was no longer the predator, he had become the prey. Naomi stood tall, her eyes fixed on the man pinned to the ground.
No anger. No resentment.
Just pity. She bent down gently but firmly. You had a chance to turn your life around, she said, her voice calm but clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. But you destroyed it yourself. Brian lifted his head, his eyes filled with desperation. You don't understand. You ruined everything I had, he yelled, but no one was listening anymore. The SWAT team dragged him out, and he couldn't resist. The last time Brian saw Naomi was when she stood there. No fear, no anger, just a person who had won. Weeks after the failed break-in, Brian Reynolds' trial became the center of media attention. The courtroom was packed, with people eagerly following every piece of testimony and every shred of evidence presented. He was convicted on multiple serious charges: illegal home invasion, armed assault, and even accusations of orchestrating smear campaigns against Naomi. As the judge read out the verdict, Brian lowered his head, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. The former police officer, once a figure of authority, was now nothing more than a name everyone wanted to forget. No one spoke of him as a law enforcer anymore. He had become a failure, an outcast in society. Meanwhile, Naomi didn't rest on her victory. She knew the real battle wasn't just about exposing someone like Brian. It was part of a much larger system that had been allowed to fester for too long, enabling abuse of power, covering up wrongdoings, and punishing those who dared to speak out. The movement Naomi led grew stronger every day. People from all walks of life began to speak out, not just on social media but at protests, seminars, and public forums. Stories that had been hidden for years were finally coming to light, and those who had suffered injustice were bravely stepping forward. Naomi was no longer just a woman fighting for justice. She had become a symbol of change, a beacon of hope that the broken system could be fixed, that power could no longer be abused without consequence. Brian Reynolds was never my ultimate target, Naomi declared in an interview. My goal is a society where no one has to fear speaking out against injustice. This is just the beginning. Don't take your eyes off the screen. There are many more mysteries ahead.